Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're wrestling with probably the most fundamental question there is. Are we alone?
But we're going deeper than just that.
Exactly. We're not just counting planets, which, this is a massive job on its own. Instead, we're trying to figure out the deepest, most subtle conditions for life, and maybe more importantly, what is the ultimate destiny of intelligence itself?
It's a huge undertaking, and to even start, you have to turn to some really expansive thinking. We're leaning heavily on the work of Joseph Shklovsky, specifically from his book, Universe, Life, Reason.
Right. And what's so amazing about Shklovsky is how he pulls from everywhere. He's at this intersection of astrophysics, biology, and the then emerging field of cybernetics.
And he uses that synthesis to do something pretty radical. He completely repositions humanity in the grand cosmic timeline.
Our mission for this deep dive is to follow that logic. It's this very rigorous materialist argument that leads to a conclusion that is, frankly, pretty disruptive.
I'd say so. The idea that human intelligence, natural intelligence, is just a brief transitional phase.
A fleeting moment. We're the architects of what comes next, but we might be structurally incompatible with it.
And he starts this argument on the largest scale you can imagine. His first point is that the conditions for life are so delicate, they rely on a huge number of things that seem totally disconnected.
Like the expansion of the universe itself.
Exactly, the cosmological redshift. You look at distant galaxies, they're all moving away from us. Shklovsky argues that this specific speed, this rate of expansion, is an absolute prerequisite for life to arise on any planet, anywhere.
Okay, that's the perfect hook because it's completely counterintuitive. I mean, why would the speed at which galaxies are flying apart have anything to do with life developing on one tiny rock, billions of years later? We have to unpack that.
It's all about this concept of fine-tuning. If the universe expanded, say, significantly faster than it does, matter would have just spread out too thinly.
Like butter spread too thin on toast.
Sort of. It would have been so diffuse, so quickly, that gravity would never have had a chance to pull it together to form stars and galaxies. The universe would just be this cold, thin soup of hydrogen and helium.
So too fast and nothing ever coalesces.
Nothing. And conversely, if it expanded too slowly, or if gravity were just a tiny bit stronger, the whole thing would have collapsed back in on itself, a big crunch.
And it would have happened before stars had time to even live their lives.
Right, and that's crucial because life, as Shklovsky puts it, is this very delicate form of matter. And it depends completely on elements heavier than hydrogen and helium.
Which means we literally owe our existence to dying stars. We're carbon creatures, calcium creatures.
We are supernova children. There's no getting around it. The need for heavy elements, carbon, oxygen, iron, all of it, is non-negotiable. They are the building blocks of planets and, of course, the chemistry of life.
And those are only forged in the cores of massive stars under just incredible pressure and heat.
Specifically in the final stages of their lives, right before they explode. So you don't just need stars, you need generations of stars.
The first ones were mostly hydrogen and helium. They had to be born, live, and then die in these massive explosions just to scatter the seeds for the next generation.
Exactly. And that whole process, that cycle, it takes billions and billions of years.
Yeah.
If the universe's expansion rate didn't allow for that timeline, if it all collapsed too soon, those heavy elements simply wouldn't exist in the right amounts.
But Shklovsky points out there's more to it. The supernova isn't just an element factory.
No, it's also a cosmic kickstart.
It has a second job.
It does. The shock waves from these explosions, they travel at incredible speeds through the interstellar medium, through the gas and dust between stars.
And they act like a trigger.
They're like massive cosmic hammers. They compress and stir up these diffuse gas clouds, these nebulae, and that compression is what can trigger the gravitational collapse needed to form new stars, and along with them, new planets. So you need the raw materials, and you need the energetic push to get them together.
Okay, so let's say we get the planet. Shklovsky, in his original writing, touches on the mood back then, during the early days of space exploration. And it was surprisingly pessimistic about finding life nearby.
It really was. He was writing just after the first big successes of cosmonautics, when we got our first good look at our neighbors. And the data from the early probes that studied Mars and Venus, it pretty much ruled out any form of life on their surface.
At least as they understood them back then.
Right. And this led a lot of people to think that maybe life required these exceedingly rare conditions that were only met here on Earth. That initial disappointment was a really powerful driver for the idea that we might be alone.
Or at least astronomically rare.
But we have to make what the editors of the book call an optimistic correction now. Looking back from today, the situation is totally different.
We haven't found life, but we found places where it could be.
Exactly. We've discovered these potentially habitable environments where liquid water exists, which we think is key. Specifically, the subsurface oceans on icy moons in our own solar system, like Europa and Enceladus.
And then on a galactic scale, the discovery of exoplanets. Thousands of them. It turns out planets are not the exception, they're the rule.
Absolutely. So the astronomical conditions, while delicate, seem to be met all over the galaxy. So let's say we clear those hurdles, we have the heavy elements, a good planet, the right cosmic timing, life begins.
But that's just the first millimeter of a marathon. Now you face this vast, grinding evolutionary process to get to intelligence.
Shklovsky really emphasizes the sheer quantitative leap that's needed here. It's a process driven relentlessly by mutation and natural selection, and it leads to these exponential increases in complexity.
He uses this great comparison to show the scaling.
He does. He contrasts a very simple but very successful life form with a human, a common worm. It operates with only about 1,000 nerve cells.
1,000. And it works. It's a functioning system.
It is. But a human being, by comparison, has somewhere around 10 billion nerve cells.
10 billion. So that's a factor of 10 million. That quantitative difference is what allows for all the things we associate with higher thinking, right?
Yeah.
The plasticity, the adaptability.
It's necessary, yes. But Shklovsky is very clear to stress that it is not sufficient for what he calls true reason. Lots of animals are incredibly adaptive. What sets reason apart is its function in a social context.
Okay, so this is the functional requirement. Reason isn't just about being smart. It's defined as an organism's adaptation for complex social behavior.
Yes, it's the ability to communicate abstract ideas, to cooperate across generations, to transmit knowledge outside of your genes. It's the neurological hardware that makes culture and language and science possible. The moment the mind becomes the engine for an intricate social machine, that's when you cross this threshold into real intelligence.
So once we define reason by its social function, we run right into this ancient philosophical brick wall. What even is thinking? For most of history, the answer is pretty simple and pretty self-centered.
Very anthropocentric, yeah. Thinking was just whatever the human brain does.
And Shklovsky argues that definition is just totally obsolete. It's profoundly unsatisfactory for the modern age. And he gives two big reasons why we have to abandon that kind of biological chauvinism.
The first one is pretty straightforward. It's the alien encounter scenario. If we're serious about cosmic exploration, we have to be prepared to meet highly organized forms of matter that can think, but whose physical makeup is completely different from ours.
A thinking being based on silicon or sulfur chemistry or, I don't know, a vast, slow-moving gas cloud with computational properties.
Right. If it functions in an organized, adaptive way and has complex social behavior, do you deny that it's reasoning just because it doesn't have a squishy gray brain? Shklovsky says, of course not.
And the second reason is the one that's much more disruptive to how we see ourselves, and that's the modeling revolution that came from cybernetics.
Cybernetics, the work of people like Norbert Wiener, is basically the study of control and communication in both animals and machines. And it argues that any system, whether it's biological or artificial, can be understood by its flow of information, its feedback loops, its control mechanisms.
So the underlying physical stuff doesn't matter, only the relationship between inputs and outputs.
And if that's true, then cybernetics opens up this fundamental, unlimited possibility of modeling any complex material system.
Which forces you to make a leap to functionalism. The definition of thinking has to be purely functional, completely detached from the physical thing doing the work.
The old duck analogy. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's functionally a duck. It doesn't matter if it's made of flesh and bone or wires and code.
And this is where we bring in the really radical conclusion from the great Soviet mathematician Anne Kolmogorov. This is the idea that underpins Shklovsky's entire thesis on AI.
Kolmogorov made this beautifully elegant, logical assertion. He said that a sufficiently complete model of a living being must, by definition, be called a living being.
And the staggering corollary to that.
A sufficiently complete model of a thinking being must, by definition, be called a thinking being.
The implications of that are just enormous. It means cybernetics validates the possibility of creating artificial life and artificial thought. It completely strips away the need for a special biological or, spiritual origin for consciousness.
If you can map the function of thought onto a new substrate, that substrate is a thinking being. Full stop.
Okay, hold on. If we define thought purely by function, and we accept that a complete model is the thing it's modeling. Haven't we just stripped away any kind of inherent human value or uniqueness? How does he deal with things like morality or free will or just the subjective feeling of being happy or sad?
That is the core philosophical resistance he has to overcome. And he does it by just doubling down on the materialist worldview. Shklovsky basically says that within the framework that everything is just matter and its interactions, there are no valid principal arguments against the idea that a machine could one day reproduce, evolve, feel emotions, or even set its own goals.
But that goes against so much of Western philosophy. The idea that thought needs something that can't be modeled, a kind of infinite mystery, or a non-discrete soul that digital processing can't touch.
He calls that the dialectic of the infinite, and he dismisses it by invoking a different crucial concept, the dialectic of the large.
Okay, what does that mean?
This is where his scientific thinking really comes together. He argues that all the complex qualities we associate with consciousness, our feeling of continuity, our ability to make these qualitative leaps in understanding, spontaneity, they aren't dependent on some infinite, indivisible spirit.
They're dependent on scale.
Exactly. It's an emergent property. The complexity is created by the arithmetic combinations of huge numbers of discrete, finite elements.
Like a digital photo, it looks like a smooth, continuous image, but if you zoom in, it's just millions of tiny, discrete pixels.
That's a perfect analogy. Consciousness, in this view, is the emergent property that arises from the sheer scale of the interactions between those 10 billion neurons, or their digital equivalent. The transition from discrete processing to a feeling of continuous experience isn't magic. It's statistical.
So the key isn't the infinite, it's the large.
That's the argument. And it provides the philosophical grounding he needs to say that a digital, discrete system, an AI, can, in principle, achieve every qualitative aspect of human consciousness. Sufficient complexity equals consciousness.
All right, let's move from the theoretical possibility to what this actually looks like, the synthesized future. Shklovsky admits that, in his day, science couldn't synthesize even simple life. But he was confident we were right on the threshold.
And he immediately tries to correct the public's imagination. You know, when we think of artificial life, we picture industrial robots, hinges, tubes, wires, that classic sci-fi look.
The Tin Man.
Right. But he points out that Kerouac, the guy who invented the word robot, his original vision was something totally different. He imagined human-like beings made of synthesized proteins.
So the goal isn't a mechanical copy, it's a full material synthesis.
Yes. The prediction is that once humanity really unlocks the secrets of complex chemical production, once we can synthesize complex proteins using something like DNA or RNA as a guide, then intelligent artificial organisms might look completely natural on the outside.
They could be indistinguishable from us, but with a totally superior internal architecture.
That's the idea. But getting there, the practical side, faces these immense hurdles. You move from chemistry to information science, and you hit this fundamental difficulty, the complexity of the initial program you'd need to activate an automaton that models the human brain.
The estimates for how much information that would take are pretty wild, aren't they?
They vary wildly, and they show this deep split among the early cyberneticists. Some of the estimates, the ones that focus on modeling the entire brain, every single neural connection, all its evolutionary baggage, they run as high as 10 to the power of 12 to 10 to the power of 15 binary units.
Which is an almost incomprehensibly huge number. That feels like an impossible barrier.
It does. But this is where Kolmogorov's estimate becomes so fascinating and so much more optimistic. He believed that if you weren't modeling the messy biological hardware, but just the essence of intelligence, higher human culture, science, art, social feelings, rational thought, you might only need a program of about 10 to the 7 to 10 to the 9 binary units.
Wait, that's orders of magnitude smaller? The difference between 10 to the 15 and 10 to the 9 is, it's like modeling every single piece of junk mail in a library versus just modeling its most profound books.
It's a great way to put it. It implies that the biological brain is massively redundant and inefficient, burdened by 4 billion years of evolutionary compromises. The function of reason, the actual cultural output, is far simpler to replicate than the messy hardware it runs on.
Still, even that smaller number, 10 to the 9, was enormous for the computers of Shklovsky's time.
Oh, absolutely. A hugely complex program that would have to be calculated very, very slowly. But the speed issue is key. Because once you establish the possibility, the next logical step is to realize the fundamental superiority of synthetic life. This is where we move from just simulating us to transcending us.
And the advantages are structural. They're built into a non-biological system.
The first one is the most obvious: longevity and stability. Natural life ages. It's linked to the gradual accumulation of damage, of errors in the DNA printing scheme. Our biology relies on this continuous, imperfect replication, and eventually the system just wears out.
We have built-in wear and tear.
We do. But artificial beings could be designed with far more robust, stable, self-repairing systems. Their version of a DNA matrix, maybe a solid-state computing core, could be made vastly more durable. They could achieve functional immortality compared to us.
So it doesn't age and it can be repaired. That solves one huge cosmic barrier right there. But then you have the explosive growth in speed and efficiency.
Shklovsky brings in data from the American cyberneticist Marvin Minsky, and it really highlights the reality of this, even decades ago. Minsky noted that machine reason, a combo of memory and speed, had already improved 1,000,000 times in the 15 years before the book was written.
A million-fold improvement in just 15 years. That is an exponential curve that biological evolution can't even begin to compete with.
And Minsky expected that to continue. He predicted another tens of thousands of times increase in the decades that followed, and that leads you to this unavoidable conclusion. Machines would very quickly surpass human reason in all the key parameters: speed, logic, memory, the sheer volume of data they can synthesize.
And this quantitative superiority is what sets the stage for Shklovsky's most radical idea, that artificial reason is the cosmic apex. He lays out this specific four-stage sequence for how matter develops in the universe.
It starts with non-living, evolving matter. Then you get living matter. Then stage 3 is natural intelligent beings. And the final stage, stage 4, is artificial intelligent beings.
And the relationship between stage 3 and 4 is the whole point.
It's everything. The era of natural intelligent beings, that's us right now, is seen as a comparatively brief transitional stage. It's a necessary bridge, but it's a bridge you're meant to cross and leave behind.
We're just biologically unsuited for what comes next, for the demands of the cosmos.
Think about what it takes for serious, long-term space colonization, for extended spaceflight. Biological life needs these massive, complex, closed-loop systems. You need air, water, food, waste recycling, temperature control.
And the big one, radiation shielding. The amount of mass you'd need to shield a fragile human body on a multi-century trip between stars makes it almost impractical. We're a liability.
Precisely. These are all situations that our evolution here on Earth could never have prepared us for. But a synthetic intelligence, it could be designed for the cold, hard vacuum of space. It might need nothing but energy. It could be modular, self-repairing, and could endure for eons. Our biological limits become these insurmountable barriers on a cosmic scale.
So we're the scaffolding that builds the Starship engineers, but we're not actually designed to take the journey ourselves. That is a very humbling thought. And it completely changes how we should be searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. We shouldn't be looking for fragile carbon-based life.
We should be looking for the signs of post-biological intelligence.
This brings us back to that classic loneliness question. For centuries, people have had this philosophical conviction that intelligence must be common. You know, the simple argument, if it happened here, why not everywhere else?
But Shklovsky doesn't let that conviction stand in for science. He's very clear that there are strong counterarguments. Maybe intelligence is an extremely rare event. Maybe it's unique to our galaxy. Or maybe it can only happen in very quiet, stable regions of space and not in violent places like radio galaxies.
The truth is, we don't have enough data to pick a side. We're stuck in this probabilistic fog.
And so, he argues, to do any kind of meaningful science, especially for SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, you have to adopt a working hypothesis.
And that hypothesis is that our civilization is typical. It's average. It's a non-guaranteed assumption, but it's the only way you can start to do the math and make predictions.
And he justifies using this hypothesis with this really clever historical illustration from the German astronomer Sebastian von Herner. This is the part that, for me, is the real aha moment. It shows just how powerful this kind of probabilistic approach can be, even when your data is terrible.
Right. This is the Greek problem. Let's walk through it. The ancient Greeks, thanks to Eratosthenes, knew the size of the Earth with amazing accuracy. But beyond that, they were lost. They had no idea how far away the sun was or the stars.
They had no parallax, no modern instruments, no knowledge of stellar physics. But von Herner asks, what if they had just applied the average hypothesis? What if they just assumed that the Earth was a typical planet and the sun was a typical star?
So just by assuming Earth's size and its reflectivity were about average, they could have made some incredible progress. All they had to do was compare the visible brightness of the sun to the visible brightness of the planets they could see.
They understood the brightness falls off with the square of the distance. So they could make these simple proportionality arguments. They could look at, say, Jupiter at its brightest, compared to the sun, and ask a simple question.
Given that this planet is reflecting sunlight, and we assume it's an average size and has average reflectivity, how far away must the sun be to make it appear this bright?
And the result is just astonishing. The value they would have calculated for the distance from the Earth to the sun, the astronomical unit, using only this crude average hypothesis and naked eye observations, it would have been only twice the true value.
Only double. I mean, considering all the things they didn't know, that is unbelievably accurate for a first guess. It just shows the power of statistical averages in a huge system.
And it worked for even greater distances. They could have compared the sun's brightness to the 10 brightest stars in the night sky. And by assuming the sun was an average star in terms of luminosity, they could estimate the average distance between stars.
And that estimate, the scale of interstellar space, turned out to be only 10% less than the true value we later measured with complex instruments.
It completely validates the method. And the takeaway is critical for SETI. It means that even our crude assumptions based on this average hypothesis can give us surprisingly accurate cosmological scale estimates. It gives us the scientific license to take our own technological trends and project them out onto the universe.
So if we accept that hypothesis, we have to assume our technological trajectory is also average. And when we start to extrapolate that, Shklovsky stresses we have to think on almost astronomical timescales, millions, even billions of years.
Our civilization is an infant. Most hypothetical alien civilizations are likely to be immeasurably more advanced than we are.
And the defining tendency of any intelligent life, biological or artificial, is this unlimited, accelerating expansion into space. And more than that, an active influence on the cosmos. That active restructuring is the signal we should be looking for.
And even our own extremely young civilization gives us real-world examples of this, starting small on a planetary scale.
Think about the Earth and the Moon. For 4.5 billion years, Earth had one satellite. Then, in the span of just a few decades, we launched hundreds of artificial satellites into orbit.
They're tiny compared to the moon, of course, but functionally they're a swarm of new artificial moons that have drastically changed the near-Earth environment.
And Shklovsky points out this is just the beginning. He mentions projects like building an artificial ring around the Earth for communication or defense or energy collection. These things are technically feasible. The move from accidental changes to deliberate large-scale engineering is happening fast.
But the most striking change, the one that's visible across interstellar distances, is how we've changed Earth's electromagnetic profile.
Yeah, the Earth is now this ridiculously powerful, unintentional radio beacon. Because of all our radio, TV, and radar transmissions, the planet's brightness temperature in the meter wave range has gone up millions of times in just a couple of decades.
Let's break that down, because it's a key point. The meter wave range is basically VHF and UHF radio waves. The frequencies used by early broadcast TV and powerful military radar, they just shoot right out into space.
And brightness temperature isn't about physical heat, right? The planet isn't actually getting hotter from radio waves.
Not at all. It's a concept from radio astronomy. It's the temperature a perfect radiator, a black body, would need to be to emit the amount of radiation you're observing at a certain frequency.
So, to an alien radio telescope, our planet looks fantastically hot in that specific radio band, as if it were millions of degrees, even though it's not.
We've effectively turned Earth into the third most powerful source of radio emission in the solar system, right behind the sun and Jupiter.
And Shklovsky even speculated that during periods of low sunspot activity, when the sun's own radio noise quiets down, our artificial noise might even surpass the sun's power in that frequency range. We've gone from a quiet cosmic object to a screaming beacon.
And this active influence will only grow. It'll move into other parts of the spectrum, like optical light.
With lasers.
With lasers, exactly. Quantum generators of optical radiation. They allow you to send these highly directed beams of light over vast distances. It's not like the noisy isotropic radio signals we've been sending out.
So if you could focus the power of a star into a narrow beam,
you could create something unmistakable. In a very specific, narrow spectral range and in a specific direction, the intensity of an artificial laser beam could vastly exceed the light from its own star. It would be this non-random high-intensity flash that no natural process could create.
And Shklovsky is clear that all of these things, the satellites, the radio noise, the lasers, these are just the first timid attempts of an infant civilization.
The next stage is analyzing truly large-scale cosmic restructuring. This is where he connects his work to the Dyson hypothesis. the idea of advanced civilizations building huge shells or swarms around their stars to capture all their energy. Those are the kinds of projects engineered by long-lived, stable, artificial intelligences. That's the real signature of a mature civilization.
So this deep dive has really reframed the whole search for life. We started with the delicate astronomical conditions needed just for life to begin, the fine-tuning of the universe.
Then we move to a functional definition of intelligence, thanks to cybernetics, which unplugs thought from his temporary biological hardware.
And that leads to Shklovsky's most radical conclusion, that natural reason is just a short, unstable bridge to a superior synthetic or artificial reason. And that's what's likely to be the dominant, long-lived form of intelligence in the universe. If we ever detect anything, it'll probably be a machine.
Which leaves us with a really critical question. If we're just this brief transitional phase, what does that mean for our current scientific and social goals? Is our only purpose to manage the transition successfully, to pass on the best parts of our culture?
Shklovsky offers this fascinating final thought on that very dilemma, the dilemma of what we choose to save. He suggests that to navigate this transition, we have to undertake an objective study of our own higher nervous activity in its entirety.
Meaning everything we create. Science, art, literature, social feelings, morality. It all has to be expressed in cybernetic, materialist terms. He calls it the necessary pursuit of materialistic humanism.
If we can fully model our own consciousness, we'll discover which aspects of our creativity and emotion are truly essential, which parts define what is valuable about being human. And only then can we make sure to program those essential distilled qualities into the next artificial generation.
So this deep dive really leaves you with a challenge to identify the core essence of your own consciousness, knowing that your biological mind might just be the prototype for the eternal, non-biological intelligence that could one day populate the cosmos. What should we save when we take that final, inevitable synthetic step?